Are we live?
Yep.
Okay. Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast. Today we are talking about America taking life. Today we ask the question, is America morally superior to communist countries? Would we even know if America had descended into a ghoulish hellscape of the communist dictators? But first, we will discuss what is going on at the Asbury Revival. Is it a revival that will turn America back to the straight and narrow? An opportunity for us as influencers to cast man alive, these live streams, man, cast judgment to grow our Twitter following, or some form of mass formation psychosis which breaks out in Christian communities from time to time. We discuss this and why doctrine is important. Also, we talk about the World Economic Forum's plan to have a global digital ID, how it ties into the East Palestine, Ohio disaster, as well as how this disaster has given us a new noun for naming disasters. Finally, we wrap up with a new segment called WTH is Going On, and you can choose whatever H means to you in that moment. I'm a relativist when it comes to swearing, where we discuss how hell is trying to rise up against Christians and offer practical advice on how you can stand firm in your conscience without becoming a hermit. All this and more on the Solomon's Corner podcast.
Welcome to the Solomon's Corner podcast, a place for thinkers. Join us as we explore the depths of theology, philosophy, and the Christian intellectual life.
We good? All right. How's it going, everybody? What you giving up for Lent? Let me know in the comments below. Lindsay, tell me if anybody comments.
Will do.
All right. Awesome. Now, you have to understand that my wife has sacrificed immensely for this. We went for a run this morning, and, I'm clean, and she's not. So, much thanks to my wife for the sacrifices she has made and the many pivots I requested of her via text message as I prepped. Okay, so, people are going to be offended about that. Some of our friends are like, oh, my word, are they okay?
Let her speak, Daniel. She's got something important to say.
She has something important to say, which I say, no, she doesn't. She's a woman. I'm just kidding. You got to say that every time now. All right, we're going into the Asbury Revival stuff. We got a lot to talk about here. So part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up, those that don't know, there's apparently this big revival happening in Asbury. I believe it's Asbury, Kentucky. There's stuff going on about it at Twitter. Essentially, it's a very nice looking chapel that, has stuff going on where I don't really know how it started. Nobody really knows how revivals start. I guess maybe you could read a book about it. Usually, it's not like Billy Graham. It seems like Billy Graham planned his revivals. He's like, hey, let's go to a stadium. And he meets with the administrators and he goes and he sets this whole thing up. And then it's like a bunch of people come and meet Jesus. Not Billy, Jesus. But the point is that this has caused a lot of discussion on Twitter. And you really start to see people's underlying philosophical assumptions on these kinds of matters because obviously there's a phenomenon happening. Nobody really knows what's happening. Nobody even knows why it's happening. And so everybody's kind of philosophical or theological presuppositions automatically just map on it. So you got these people who are cessationists who are like, it's definitely not, a real revival. There's too much emotion in there, too many tears. Last I checked, when Jesus called the apostles, nobody shed a tear. So therefore, I'm questioning the legitimacy of this whole endeavor. Somebody talking? I see you typing.
Yes.
Who is
Paul
it?
had said that I sound normal.
Oh, great. You
Paul
don't sound like a
Roberts,
Canadian person?
I guess not.
Well, sometimes when we get in fights, I feel like that's how she sounds. Wah, wah. I'm going to write a book called Wah. Anyway, I'm glad that people are jumping in on the chat. Thanks, Paul. I'm glad. I baited him with the South Park thing. I told him earlier. I said, we're going to have a South Park clip. That's how you get them. Next, you never know, Paul. Maybe we'll put on a Bill Burr. That'll get me in real big trouble with the Christians. But maybe we'll do the pro-life clip so that way we have justification. Well, we just want to encourage those non-Christians who are trying their hardest, like Bill Burr. Effing love that guy. Anyway, sorry. Anyway, we continue.
Asbury.
Just lost like 50% of our Christian audience with that. So the point is that you basically had these rationalists, and then you had the emotionalists kind of like coming in and saying, well, you should really be kind and understand that this is like a big deal. And just let it be. Just let it be. Now, I chose to go after the rationalists, which I think probably is something that might surprise some people because sometimes people find me a little more rationalistic just because I like philosophy. Keep thinking. and drinking water. I mean, coffee. It's coffee in this cup. It's not water. It's coffee. Plug North Arrow Coffee. There's a link in the description. Promo code Solomon. There you go. You
There's
can
a
support
link.
us, and
There's a link coming.
there's a
I'll be
link
adding that
coming.
link
It's not there yet.
here in a moment.
Anyway, wasting time. We got to get through this thing because we've got an event later today. So, let me get my notes here. So basically, I decided to engage with the rationalists, and some people engage with this; they appreciate it. But the point is that the hyper rationalists on faith have to slow down here, because you need to just kind of take a wait and see approach with these kinds of things and see how they end up developing, and understand that feelings are not bad. They are instruments that serve a purpose. This comes from one of my close friends. I don't want to necessarily say who they are because they haven't given me permission to use their identity on a live stream. However, this person and I talk regularly all the time about philosophy and the intersection on, the psychological space and the philosophical space. And one of the things that he helped me understand in my own philosophical kind of metaphysical development is the idea of how to describe emotions in a more normal way. And in Thomistic thought, you have the senses. There's, taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing, those five. And emotions can be described in a similar way, that they serve essentially the same purpose, but they're not the same kind of material stuff like the senses. And so just like the senses do not give us truth, right? Just because I touch this thing doesn't necessarily mean that it's really there. Somebody could be deceiving me or something like that. Somebody might make me, who knows, whatever. You can come up with all sorts of thought experiments. It's really here, just by the way. Now, for you guys, you just got to take that on faith because all you have is sight. But I have all five senses feeling this thing. So emotions are the same way. What they essentially do is they give us data. Immutably, they give us data. Because if you don't have the data, then you can't make a judgment. Like, you're not sensing something that you haven't sensed. And so emotions are the same way. When your emotions start getting flared up in some sort of an event, it's meant to cause you to start to think through what and why these emotions are doing this. So just like our senses, emotions enhance our experience and can alert our minds to things that our minds have not taken time to judge. If someone's feelings are being aroused by an act of the Holy Spirit, we should not disparage them, because we don't really know if it's the Holy Spirit or not, right? Because the Spirit is immaterial. We don't know what's happening. But God made us material, spiritual beings. So when the spiritual world engages with the material world, our material emotions, and that's what they are hormonal. They are connected to material processes. We should start to see an elevated level of those things. So instead of disparaging them, we should affirm that they actually are having feelings, because they are. There's just no doubt about it. Somebody gets up on a stage, they're crying, they're having this experience. You can't say, hey, you're not really crying. That's not the way to do it, right? You're not really feeling angry would be another bad way to approach things, right? We have to help their minds catch up with their heart by asking them, all right, this is great, especially in this context, but have you counted the cost of following Christ, right? Because even people who had incredible emotional experiences with Christ, like you think of the feeding of the 5,000 or the healing and all this kind of stuff, he has crowds, and then where do they all go? They all go away, because then it gets hard. So have they counted the cost of following Christ? Do this when it's appropriate. In the meantime, celebrate with their repentance and conversion, right? There's nothing wrong. Hey, great for you guys. Glad you're finding Jesus. Let's talk about what a cross is after this incredible honeymoon experience. But if they reject the gospel based on the cost to follow Christ, this does not invalidate, this is important, okay? If they reject the gospel, even after this experience, that does not mean the emotional experience was not real, that the Holy Spirit was not really moving in their lives. What this actually means is that their emotions were willing to follow Christ, but their minds were not. And now somebody who's a philosopher is going to say, oh, but emotions aren't an intellect, so how do they will? It's not a technical philosophy paper, okay? Just go with it, all right? Maybe we could say the body was willing, but the spirit was weak, okay? There you go. When people are having spiritual experiences, emotions should be high. No one expects a groom or a bride to be stoic on their wedding day. Nor should children being adopted remain emotionless during the adoption process as it's being fulfilled. Revivals are weird and do not always produce a massive crop of dedicated believers, but this does not mean God was not in it. If the parable of the sower is any indication of the reality of conversion, we should expect 75% of these new converts to leave in a short period of time. That said, let's think of ways we can come alongside what God is doing, unwavering in the truth that when you convert, you are not just entering a relationship, but a kingdom not of this earth. And this kingdom, this is where the rubber meets the road, or where, the goats and the sheep get separated. This kingdom that Christ is establishing has moral laws that the new believer must follow. They are not optional. They are mandatory. Our example for this is John the Baptist. He is a good example of the believer and what he should be willing to suffer for. And I just want to take a side tangent here. There are so many people, because of the Columbine shooting, myself included, back in the day, for those that don't know, especially if there's any younger people watching, that there was a shooting at a school. It shook America. There were articles about it because this one girl, God bless her, and she gave her life up for Christ. These kids who more than likely were demonically possessed went in, asked her, are you okay over there?
Yeah.
You need to sneeze? You need a tissue?
No, I do need
My wife's over here sneezing, hacking, because she thinks we're about to pull a clip up, but I'm gonna give her 5 minutes. I can monologue for 5. So at the end of the day, this shooting happens, and the story that came out of it, and songs were written by the Christian community. It was a beautiful story, tragically beautiful. This young girl, I think she was 16 or 17. Somebody in the comments let me know what her actual age was, but I believe it was 16 or 17. I can't remember exactly, but the point was that they asked her, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And she said yes, and they shot her in the head, and she died. And this caused, especially amongst the young Christian students, to ask the question, would I be willing to do that? And what I noticed started to happen was, especially as Islamic terrorism against Christians and attacking Christians around the world started to really reach heights in the Christian mainstream news, and as well also in mainstream news in general, as we were in the war in Iraq, it started to kind of just be like, there's really only one thing to die for, and it's just whether or not Jesus is God, whether or not you believe in Jesus. But everything else, you shouldn't suffer for that. You don't need to suffer for those, what some people might want to call non-essentials. Of course, this begs the question, well, how do you know what's essential and what's not? Because obviously you don't want to die for a non-essential and be mistaken about it, right? Or obviously you don't want to be like, oh, that's a non-essential and it's actually an essential. And so John the Baptist is a good example, because he does not die because he said Jesus was Lord. He dies because he paved the way for the Messiah and found himself persecuted for criticizing an invalid marriage. And there are plenty of rational Christians who won't criticize anyone's marital status, whether that's homosexual marriages, whether that's just not getting married and living together. They'll just say, well, it'll all fall into place, as if there's no consequences to these things. But clearly there are consequences to these things because it's against God's law. And so this is radical talk right now, because, well, how can you expect somebody to do that? Well, by the power of the Holy Spirit. You can't do this on your own. You're going to make mistakes even if you try, even if you're well-intentioned. Obviously, there are godly marriages. People say that they like our family a bunch. We still have our problems, but we have to constantly be crucifying those problems at the foot of the cross, with the understanding that they are violations of God's law. That's just part of the Christian life. So John the Baptist comes in, and he criticizes the marital sin of a king who has the power and a sword. And you've got Christians out there who won't even criticize their own family members because they just, we don't want to rock the boat. Well, you don't have to go like on a crusade, but if you're being invited to a gay wedding, and you're a Christian, you are morally obligated to say no. You are morally obligated if somebody says, what do you think of my gay marriage? Or what do you think of me divorcing this person for a hotter person or just somebody who makes me feel better, whatever. You're morally obligated to tell them that's a sin. That's just the way it is. If they're asking your opinion, I'm not saying you have to go out and like give out flyers and tracts and stuff. You know, hey, you know, like a lot of Christians like to do. So I've been praying about this, and I've decided to tell you you're a dick. You know, like that. Anyway, sorry, I probably shouldn't say that. We need a censor. You know, they don't obviously do that. Somebody's gonna be mad at me again. Oh well. So anyway, suffering for moral truth is the cost of Christianity. That's the point. Though these experiencing revival at Asbury may not know everything about the faith in this moment, but pastors should at least recognize this as job security and be ready to teach them the word of God and equip them for living in the kingdom according to God's moral laws. In short, let God do his work, and let's be ready to nurture these seeds regardless of whether they be converts of reason, emotion, or both. Merry Christmas.
Daryl Lovia has said, preach it, brother.
Thank you, sir. Amen. Give me some of those like amen emojis.
So I gave the hands up.
Oh yeah.
Hands up.
Hands up. There we go. All right. So anyway, I tweeted all that stuff out, and then my good friend Bethel drops this video affirming exactly what we all feared. Context for this video before you can make it big. Okay. Before we so just get it ready.
Yep.
So the context of this video is that this guy in the video is a liberal evangelical, says progressive evangelical leader, says he has spoken to multiple queers at Asbury who have all said that conversations with staff and students have led them to be hopeful that this revival is moving the school in a more queer affirming direction. So now, again, to you rationalists out there, you were right to be cautious about this, but you shouldn't have jumped to the conclusion that these people weren't really having an experience. What appears to be happening is that somebody is trying to, like the devil always does, capitalize on the work of the Lord and make it something that it's not supposed to be. So, hit the video.
People who are all queer, who are all related to Asbury in some way. I talked to an actual student who's a trans man who's in the process of transitioning, and they are out about this at Asbury. I've talked to someone on the seminary side, it's a different university, but it's right across the street, and it's part of the Asbury world, who is a side B gay Christian. And I've just talked to an alumni who is out, who's a gay Christian, a gay black man, okay? I've talked to all three of them, and I've asked them this same question. I said, so what do you think? Like, how do we measure, what it means for this to be successful? And I will tell you that all three of them express that they are hopeful based on conversations and what they've said and what they've heard and experiences that they've had with faculty and other students, that Asbury will continue on the path that they've already been on of really waking up to the reality that there are some systemic issues both in their history of racism and also of mishandling and mistreating the queer community.
Okay. Oops. So, seems like there are some problems there. There's more video, I believe. Do we have the other video too, or just that one?
I don't.
Okay, that's all right. I mean, another one. I didn't catch it there, so maybe it wasn't that one. I was editing the rest of my show notes while you guys were listening to that. But the point is that obviously appearances are not always what they seem, and so the new covenant. We're not getting to that stuff until later. So can we change the slide to something else? We got this. If you guys wait till the end of the show, you're going to understand what just happened right there and what my wife thought would be a good still image for me to have on the coming up scene. Anyway. Oh, man. Wait till you see what's in that jar. Okay. So anyway, this is precisely the reason why we have to understand that the experience with God has to be coupled with doctrine, because your experience with God doesn't mean anything if you don't have doctrine. Okay? Just like your identity doesn't mean anything if you don't have a personality, right? Or your personality doesn't mean anything if you don't actually have an identity, right? I mean, we can say that AI imitates human beings, but who is it? Well, that question doesn't even make sense. It's a what, not a who. Now, the question of what is your experience with God is dependent on who God is and what he is. Okay? So you can't have a who without a what. You got to have the what first. Okay? Funny story, actually. I had a conversation with somebody about this. He came up in the middle of a conversation that I was having with another person, and we were talking about doctrine, and he was curious about, some of the doctrines of impassibility, which God doesn't have emotions, or doctrines like God is without parts. And we were just talking about some of these more heady doctrines that you have to affirm to be a Christian but not necessarily understand. And he was just curious about what's the basis for him. And this other guy came up. He was very, very much you don't need, it's all about the personal relationship. And he said, God's not a what, he's a who. And I turned to him and I said, well, how do you have a who without a what? And it was like, and that was pretty funny. Anyway, so we keep going. So this is why you got to have doctrine, okay? Because if you don't have doctrine, then you cannot frame your experiences properly. And you do get taken advantage of. You are the seed that falls on the road and the devil scoops it up, right? That's what we're seeing here. It's that parable of the sower. They fall on the road and they get snatched up by the devil. They fall into the weeds and they get choked out by the cares of the world. They fall onto rocky soil and they cannot stand the heat, right? And they shrivel and die. And then there's the fourth one that falls on good soil. That good soil is doctrine. And so you have to have something that says, okay, doctrine is essential to this. And so it's precisely for this reason that you have to understand that doctrine is essential to the identity as a Christian. You cannot be a Christian who merely has an experience with Christ. Your relationship with Christ is defined by who he revealed himself to be in thought, word, and deed, which is interesting because we also are supposed to proclaim him in thought, word, and deed. And so we cannot know the mind of God. We can't know the first part. We can't know the thoughts of God. Who knows the mind of God? That's what the scriptures say. And you don't even need the Bible to even believe that. If God exists, how could you even know what he's thinking? You can't even know what your wife is thinking or your child, okay, which are infinitely smaller in terms of complexity and difficulty and wonder and mystery. So that's not an implication for you Thomas out there that God is complex, okay? Shut your mouths, stay on the show, follow along, be quiet, be good, or leave. So anyway, so he had to reveal this to us. He had to reveal the thoughts that he had. Otherwise, and this is what he does with the Gospels. He does this through the law and the prophets, as well as in the new covenant established by Christ. In word, Christ came, and he was the Word made flesh. And he preached to the masses to repent. Bless you. My wife is sneezing quietly, and she thinks she's going to be, not somebody that's going to draw attention. So this means that when Christ came, he calls people to repent. I was actually reading in a commentary the other day that when Jesus comes along and he sits down at a meal with some of these people, there's this understanding in Jewish culture that meals were a sign of unity together. Well, the implication of this is that these people, it's not that Jesus was uniting with them in their sins. It was that they were coming to him and actually willing to leave their sins and find out what it meant to be a follower of him. So this means that your doctrines have to also incorporate a moral law or a natural law as revealed by creation and affirmed by Scripture. This means that these people who think that the Holy Spirit is queer affirming, they're being misled. And it's on those professors and pastors and teachers who are disrupting good intentioned Christians. One of them was praying that somebody would leave their gay emotions, that they'd be healed of their gay desires. And a professor came in and said, no, we don't do convergent therapy here. That dude's who did that guy's in trouble. I mean, that's not like, hooking up a guy onto an electrode and saying, don't be gay. I mean, that's not what's going on there. I feel like we could have taken out of context clips. So were you going to say something?
I was just thinking you want Daily Wire out of context.
yeah, Daily Wire out of context. Hey, pick me up. Maybe you need some B-roll footage. It's important for us to understand that we are not pious pragmatists. I got that from a commentary on Matthew, and it was describing Judas. We are not Christians because it works. We are Christians because it's true. It's important for American Christians to understand this, especially that for the most part of Christian history, even now, Christians are the most persecuted group according to some statistics. That's not getting a 401k and having a family of 3. Okay, like that. It's not Christianity. That's the prosperity of a nation who God has decided to bless, despite many of its failings, as we'll see later. Not everything that works is true, but everything that's true works. Okay, not everything that works is true, but everything that works, or everything that's true, works. But all things that are true will bear fruit, even in death. That's what that means. Okay, it's not merely like works based on how you define it. It's how God defines it. And it's interesting on this note because when you read the crucifixion account and you read the Gospels, if you pay attention to some of the popular objections amongst Christianity to each other, like especially when a Christian feels led to not subscribe to Disney Plus, for example, Christians will oftentimes criticize that person, like, well, what's that doing for your spiritual faith? You know, and they don't realize it, but what they're actually doing is they're echoing the people who mocked Christ for his sacrifice. They said, well, if you're really who you say you are, if all these things that you really taught were true, then God would come down and save you from that cross. Well, if choosing this moral high ground is actually true, then your life should be easier than mine. Right? Because, you know, Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So all of these ways that Christians sometimes unintentionally imitate the devil in the desert is really, I think, because they don't understand what doctrine is, and they actually are pious pragmatists and they don't realize it. So this means that doctrine is not just for the intellectual either. It means that you have to assent to it even if you don't understand its mechanisms. Now, that doesn't mean that when I say you don't understand, that doesn't mean that you don't know what the words mean. You just might not know why it's a doctrine, but that's not the same thing as not knowing that you have to believe it, right? For example, if I say a man can't be married to a man because I'm a Christian, and you shouldn't believe that either because you're a Christian, marriage is between a man and a woman. If you say, well, I don't know what any of those words mean, there's something else going on. It's not that you don't have a philosophical background, and we would seek help elsewhere. Let's just put it that way. But doctrines are to be assented to because you do know what those sentences mean, even if you don't know how they were arrived at by the church of your choice. And so it's important to understand that your conscience demands that whatever church you are attending, that you know what the doctrines are that it holds, and that you can say, yes, I believe, help my unbelief. Okay? There's a big difference there between saying, I agree with that, agree with that. I don't know if I agree with that, but I agree with this and this and this. That's not what it means. And that's not a Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, whatever. That is just what it means to be a principled person. And if you want to see what that looks like we covered earlier, go watch Eric Liddell and see what he did. I'm not a Presbyterian Sabbatarian, but you can understand that he understood exactly what that meant and he knew how to live it out. So this is the danger of Asbury. What are they converting to? Christianity, whatever form you claim, just is the summation of its doctrines. People panic at this point and say, well, which one is the true set of doctrines? This is the journey of the Christian, though, seeking the kingdom of God first. And in the same way Mary affirmed God's will for her life, unlike Sarah or Zechariah, who doubted God's ability to accomplish his will by natural means, she couldn't have understood how this mystery was to be fulfilled in her. Yet she said, as Christ did in the garden, I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Now some rationalist is going to say, those weren't the exact words. Anyway, dynamic equivalence, okay? She did the same thing. Basically said, your will be done in my life. There's even, I think, a Protestant Christian song that's like, I can't remember, about Mary actually saying those words. Anyway, side note. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you thinking of the Be Born in Me song?
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah.
Anyway, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Anyway, so doctrine is essential to Christian life. Deal with it. All right, so moving on. About the unique digital IDs and global conspiracy. For the sake of time, I had more to say on Asbury, but I really want to hit everything that I prepared for today. The reason why I'm talking about unique digital IDs is because there is can you pull up the World Economic Forum clip or image, the image of the World Economic Forum global ID? There we go. All right, so don't show it to me yet, but I don't want to spend too much time on this section, so keep me accountable, people in the comments, and just tell me to move on once you've had enough of this. The reason why I think it's important is because in the Christian community, there is so much end times theology around the mark of the beast. And every generation that has faced existential threats has always seen it as this is the end. Like it's just unquestionable. You are more likely to be wrong at this point than you are to be right. Now, I have my reasons for thinking that it's more likely that we are in the end times, and most people probably won't like my reasoning for it because it's not biblical in the sense that I don't have a Bible verse for it. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. I just haven't found one to justify it, but I think that makes sense. But everybody knows about this East Palestine chemical spill that's happened, and Biden is neglecting the Ohioans. And while I'm a Michigan native who has a strong bias against the Buckeye State, I think that this is disgusting thing that Biden has done. He's denied federal aid to them while simultaneously deciding that he's going to support Ukraine on a variety of issues. Americans, leaders do morally have an obligation to their citizens first before anybody else. That's just the fact. They have a responsibility. If I were to say to my children, no, we're just going to help all these other people and you have to suffer, I would be a bad dad, objectively and biblically, by the way. And so there is this assumption that because there are these exceptions in the Bible of, like, for example, Abraham offering his son on the altar or Jesus being offered on the cross, that we should just basically let our kids suffer and help everybody else, with no sort of discernment process about whether or not that's actually good for the souls that are in your care. Just like a pastor has souls in his, and he's responsible for their care, so a parent and a mother and father are responsible for the souls in their care. And so that means, first and foremost, their kin, and then secondly, their neighbors. So now, I just want to try and coin something here, but I really think that we could maybe call this a Buttigieg, right? Like, man, I pulled a Buttigieg, Like, I really feel like, especially because he's got butt right in the middle of his name, it's just, I really feel like that could be something that would work. Where are you going? Because I need you to pull up a clip here. All right. So, now one of the stories that comes up around this story is the East Palestine was experimenting with digital IDs. So, let's just show this graphic real quick. This is from the World Economic Forum. Okay. You got it? There we go. This is from the World Economic Forum. Now, this is going around the internet. It's in your churches. If you're a pastor, like, your congregants are talking about this thing 100%. Like, they either think it's a conspiracy theory or they are derogatory towards people who even talk about this. But this is directly from the World Economic Forum's website. You can go and look at it. All I had to do was type in World Economic Forum digital ID. They're not even hiding this stuff anymore, guys. It's just out on the internet. You can pull it up. And here's the thing. Apparently, in East Palestine, they were experimenting with a similar form of technology. And for those that don't understand what digital identity is, there are people who are really, really conspiratorial about it. And then there are people who are like, this is no big deal. It's both. So we're going to try and thread that needle. The reality is that digital ID is what you have to use to access just about everything. And for the most part, you're actually already using it anyway. It's called your phone number. More on that later. But the point is that the World Economic Forum wants to do one that's globally across the board. And this does make a lot of sense from a technical perspective. Before we play the clip of what everybody's talking about, because apparently 3 months before this train wreck that is a chemical disaster zone, they actually were experimenting with medical digital IDs that would track your data and all this kind of stuff. And so I just want to play it for you without the knowledge so that you can see how easy it is to kind of get sucked down into some of these conspiratorial things without actually knowing about it. You got the clip ready?
Yep.
Okay, here it is. So this is a local news from East Palestine, Ohio.
East Palestine is known as the place to be. It's way ahead of the curve on a program to provide better treatment for anyone in the event of an emergency. I learned how it works and how it could help everyone in East Palestine.
The whole thing, just FYI.
My ID provides quick medical information for emergency responders. Darlene Chapman is the outreach coordinator for this project, and she's an EMT.
If they're in a situation where they can't tell us or they don't have any family around, this is something that would make my life easier.
My ID works by taking a camera phone and pointing it at a QR code. It provides valuable medical information such as allergies, breathing difficulties, or other conditions, so you get proper treatment and care.
If anybody sees the QR code, you'll be able to scan this and get the information. So it helps that person, not necessarily just here, but anywhere in the nation.
There are a few
There you go.
options.
That's it. All right, so here's the deal. So now there's this guy named Majid Nawaz. Are they seeing his face right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is Majid Nawaz, which great still frame, by the way, for us to start off with. He looks like he's in a meditative zen. But he's a Muslim guy who was radical at one point. And this is a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience where I first was found out about him. And the reason why I think it's important for us to kind of contextualize all this is because Majid Nawaz was the one who posted that tweet, that video, and shared it out. So that's how I found out about it. Now, the thing about Majid Nawaz, just hold your horses. So the thing about Majid Nawaz, that's my wife, by the way. Sometimes I call her a horse. So he is very much ahead of the curve, partly because, and I think that a lot of conservative Christians especially don't realize how bad the Patriot Act was against Muslims. I don't think they understand that, and we really owe an apology to some of the more moderate Muslims who were unjustly targeted, I think. But he was actually a radical at one point. He got taken in, captured by I think it was an Egyptian government because he was not going to try and do suicide bombing or any of that kind of stuff. What he was, if my memory recalls correctly, he was essentially going in to kind of create political uprisings and things like that. And he got arrested. And he's lucky to be alive. Anyway, a non-Christian humanitarian group saved his life, and that was kind of the beginning of him, changing his views on the Western world. He comes onto the Joe Rogan Experience, and this was during the pandemic, where he starts to expose some of these what were considered conspiracy theories at the time are now just known fact. Like people just know this. The mainstream news is not covering it, but these things prove to be true across the board. And so this is what he says on the Joe Rogan Experience.
We ready?
Yeah.
Oh, golly.
Oh, you went
Hold
back.
on. There we go.
You've got a scenario now that you're checking in and out everywhere you go using vouchers that are programmed and you can only spend where you're told you can spend them. There's another word for that, man. That's called the Chinese social credit system. That's what it's called. And anyone who watches Black Mirror will know what I'm talking about. That's that TV show, right?
Yeah.
So what they are telling us, and when I say they, who's they? People in power. That's the head of our economy, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Second most powerful person other than the Prime Minister and maybe the Foreign Secretary in the UK.
He's British,
right?
by the way.
He's telling us, I just played it there for you. He's telling us that's what he, as the UK, the head of the G7, want to bring in for the G7. So a scenario where, like in New York at the moment, because the passport infrastructure is in place, you bring in that digital currency and you've got this total control. Mm-hmm. And if I'm speaking to you the way I'm speaking now, and my employer or government, you heard that in the quote directly, yeah, deems me as saying or doing something inappropriate, suddenly I can't actually pay to come here and speak to you anymore. My digital currency won't even pay for the ticket because it will be known that I'm coming to speak to you. Sorry, your vouchers don't allow you to purchase that ticket to go and speak to Joe.
All right, so cryptocurrencies. And so the thing is that the more digital we become, the more control that world leaders actually have, like the World Economic Forum, your own government. This doesn't have to be global, by the way. I mean, you could just find yourself in a real sucky situation. China is a great example. They've been developing their own cryptocurrency, or digital currency rather, for a while. So now, before you get your, I don't want to hear any tinfoil conspiracy theories hat on, see what I did there? You're actually a conspiracy theorist if you don't want to hear about conspiracy theories. Let's just take a step back for a minute and talk about the technical infrastructure here. You have to understand that in tech, and this gets to the idea of your phone number. Your phone number is a unique ID. As a developer, every place I have worked, whether that's in the private sector or the public sector or the nonprofit sector, any of those groups that I have worked with have almost immediately within 3 to 6 months have said, hey, can you help us with duplicates? And what they mean by that is that they have people who forgot their password to access their business or access the system. And so they because the internet is open, and because the businesses, therefore, that operate on the internet are open, they can create multiple accounts. So, for example, I mean, I could go and get our Rumble count up to 25 right off the bat by just creating probably 25, Gmail accounts and going and actually subscribing to my channel with those accounts. Because again, there's nothing to say, well, who is Daniel actually behind this email? And so I can create and go in, and this actually is a way that hackers do this. Actually, I've worked for organizations where this has happened, where somebody, that CAPTCHA thing, one of the things that they'll do is a hacker will try to get around that and then just automatically create a whole bunch of users in the system and just crash the system because you can only have so many users. And so one place I worked, they actually had like 5,000 Chinese users in their system. And so the point is that at the end of the day, this is a real problem in the digital space. It has real consequences too. And so one of these consequences would be, let's just say that you've got 2 John Does in the system, and one has cancer that's stage 4, and the other one has like a mild form of skin cancer. And the hospital has no unique identifiers to determine which John Doe needs which treatment. Well, that would go bad and people would die. So this is a real issue in every single system you use. I guarantee it. Every single system, whether that's government, whether that's private, whatever it is, people are constantly mixing up the numbers and the names of individuals because these technological systems have no way of verifying your identity until two-factor authentication came along, which was a security bonus. It also was a reason for them to do it, because why? Now they can say, hey, you want to keep your data secure? Why don't you sign up for two-factor authentication? Oh, and look at that. All these Gmail accounts that Daniel has is associated with the same phone number. That's your global ID. In fact, I would be willing to bet that your global ID will be some sort of phone number plus first and last name, maybe birth date, and then hashed. Anyway, that's a technical term for the techies on the thing. What that is, just scrambling of the data. Anyway, bottom line is that this has to happen. So this brings us to the clip from Klaus Schwab. This was the one that Majid Nawaz actually pulled up alongside that clip of the digital ID and all this kind of stuff. And again, digital ID plus cryptocurrency does equal real scary totalitarian control for all the reasons that Majid mentioned in that video. They can literally program the currency at that point. And the currency actually becomes a bottleneck for your freedom. That's fact. And that is what's active currently in China right now. So World Government Summit. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hey, is that the One World conspiracy? No, it's not. It's kind of like Andrew Klavan, Spencer Klavan, no relation. It's like World Government Summit, no relation to One World conspiracy theories. But here's the world, maybe multiple worlds government summit. Maybe that's what they meant, fine print. Anyway, continue. Well, this is Klaus Extraordinaire talking about how those who master technology will be the masters of the world.
In 2015, the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, and I mentioned 23 or 24 technologies which will change the world, like crypto and so on and so on. The book was considered science fiction. All those technologies have become reality, and there are new technologies. And I would say we are in the second minute, or whatever we want to call. We are at the beginning. When you look at technology transformation, it usually takes place in the terms of an S-curve. And we are just now where we move into the exponential phase. And I agree, artificial intelligence, but not only artificial intelligence, but also the metaverse, near space technologies, and I could go on and on, synthetic biology. Our life in 10 years from now will be completely different, very much affected, and who masters those technologies in some way will be the master of the world.
There you go. at this point, people are like, mark of the beast. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, I think that Klaus Schwab is actually right about this, that the more we become dependent on technology, the more that the duplicate identity issue becomes a problem for governments around the world. And governments, just like people, are self-preserving entities. They want to self-preserve. They will do anything to survive outside of some sort of divine inspiration that says it's worth dying for this thing or that thing. But governments don't typically do that. So who are going to be the masters of the world? Well, probably a few select leaders, mostly based on their net worth and the technology that they've contributed, and probably, their affinity for LGBT plus fetishes. So, something like that. Anyway, this comes back to doctrine, though. We can't sit here and say, that, well, America is our only hope. We can't do that. You have to have a kingdom that you are a part of that transcends this world and all the nations that came before us and all the nations that'll come after us. We can't have a Beth Moore crush on Jesus kind of theology. Okay. She literally said that on her Twitter. Nor can you be rooted in conversion experiences. You have to grow beyond your conversion experience. You have to have deep roots where when you're in the darkness, you choose to look at the light. And so we have to grow to know the kingdom of which we are citizens. One way to do this is to reflect on doctrines and their meaning, not their justification or rationale, just the meaning of the doctrines as they're asserted for your life. And then the second is to inspire yourself that Christ's kingdom is greater than any nation. And we just watched Chariots of Fire, which I got this passage from. There's a great sermon in there about how you should be willing to serve God over country. And it says, Isaiah 40:15, surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands, God weighs the islands, as though they were fine dust. We must be true first to doctrine, then to country, holding leaders in both kingdoms accountable to the laws that God has set, meaning pastors and priests and politicians and leaders. They are not permitted to just do whatever they want because they have the power to. Kingdoms that forget they are in God's hands, like the prophet says, will become dust. Those who are believers with emotional faith will find themselves counted among the goats, eating whatever is put in front of them by the globalist elites, rather than the sheep that listen to the voice of the shepherd and follow his laws, even unto slaughter. All right, so now we're going to get into the, is abortion in America better than the communist countries? Well, we're going to talk about abortion in America and the stats around communism. Spoiler alert. And this is going to make conservatives really mad, especially patriotic ones. Let me just preface this with, this is in no way meant to make people who fought for this country feel like they fought for the wrong cause or any of this stuff. Every nation has sins. Every nation needs an army. Every nation needs people who are willing to die for it. That does not mean that the nation is morally perfect in every way and in every aspect. There were courageous people in Russia who fought for their country in World War II. They might not have had the same values, but even in that, you can still say there was some virtue in those people for being willing to fight, even if it was coerced. They could have died fleeing their country, and instead they died willing to fight against the Nazis, who we know now had the Holocaust. So when we consider America, we often think about the liberties that we have, but we rarely consider her to be worse than the communist countries who ravaged their land, mainly because we are incredibly prosperous and we wrongly assume that this is due to our pious pragmatism, like we talked earlier. In other words, if you're successful, then you must be godly. Obviously, the term success here doesn't really matter because America is the best place to live in the world. What I mean by that is many people say, well, how do you define success? We're not going to get into that because you're in America. You're living in it. And if you think there's a better place, go find it, come back, tell us what it is, and then talk about the definition of success. Unless, of course, you find yourself in the womb of a mother, then America is not so great. So I did this little experiment here where I decided to go and pull up ChatGPT, as well as using some of the where did I get my stats from? Hold on, there we go. It's the Guttmacher organization, which I just think They're a very pro-abortion group. And according to the U.S. Council of Bishops, where I got the data for the abortion rates, they said that's the group to use, and the UCCB was a little bit out of date. But the number of deaths by communist countries, according to this book right here, the Black Book of Communism. Can you pull up a clip of that, or right here, the image?
It is you.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah,
okay.
It's on you right now.
So right here, and I've got an image in our slideshow too for when we read some quotes from that. But the point is, there's 100 million deaths in this book that are recorded between 1918 and 1999. And this is across all the countries. So I'm just going to read you this real quick. I didn't get a chance to give this to Lindsay. But just listen to this these stats, okay? Here we go. Wrong page. Hold on. Give me a minute. I got it. Don't drop. Don't drop now. Let's see here. This is going to be edited out for the main section. Where are you, buddy? There we go. This is a shorter list. Nonetheless, we have to start somewhere with calculating the atrocities of communism. The following is a rough approximation based on unofficial estimates, gives some sense of the scale and gravity of these crimes of communism. And the book, again, is the Black Book of Communism, Crimes, Terror, and Repression. And it's written by a bunch of French guys. And for those who think that I just pulled this off of a conspiracy theory shelf, this was published by Harvard Press in 1999. So, USSR, 20 million deaths. China, 65 million deaths. Vietnam, 1 million deaths. North Korea, 2 million deaths. Cambodia, 2 million deaths. Eastern Europe, 1 million deaths. Latin America, 150,000 deaths. Africa, 1.7 million deaths. Afghanistan, 1.5 million deaths. The international communist movement and communist parties not in power, about 10,000 deaths. The total approaches 100 million people killed. Now, if you do the math, on average from 1918 to 1999, the average is about 1.12 million people per year. Now, according to this little analysis that I did with ChatGPT, I went on the Guttmacher website and found out that the total of deaths for children in abortion is 14.4 per 1,000. Now, I'm not real great at ratios and math and things like that. As I like to say, philosophers need to know logic, not math. But there you have it. So what I did was I used ChatGPT to figure out, okay, based on 14.4 thousand abortions per 1,000 women in the U.S., from 15 to 44, what would that mean based on our census data? So I knew that ChatGPT would screw me over if I said how many babies are killed every year. And so I decided to swap babies for rabbits. So here's some slides. I said, what is it?
We're transitioning now.
So I said, help me understand, ChatGPT, the rate, 14.4 births per 1,000 rabbits in a population. What does this practically mean? And it says the rate of 14.4 births per 1,000 rabbits in a population means that for every 1,000 rabbits in the population, there are on average 14.4 new rabbits born each year. Now, keep in mind, this is actually abortion data, and I switch it to deaths halfway through. To put it another way, if there were 1,000 rabbits to start of the year, we would expect 14.4 new rabbits born at the end of the year. This rate can be useful for understanding population growth. It's worth noting that this is rate, blah, 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 all these other factors. And we'll talk about that with communism too, because I understand what I'm saying here is very controversial. So moving on to the next slide, we get the questions for the next one. How would you apply this population to 300 million rabbits? And that's just a general estimate. We're actually around like 330, I think is what the actual number is later on. It says if we calculate the birth rate, this is the math, and we get into how we actually calculate this. It says, therefore, in a population of 300 million rabbits, we would expect about 4.32 million new rabbits to be born each year, assuming that the birth rate of 14.4 births per rabbit is constant and there are no other factors affecting the population growth rate. Now, keep in mind, 14.4 births per 1,000 rabbits is actually abortions. Okay? So that's what it would say if it was 300 million. So now we go even further. What is 58%? We get this number. This is just for me I'm just walking you through how I got these numbers. So I know there's some math people on here, so correct me if I'm wrong. But this is just to say, hey, here's the census data, which is 333. And I said, of the 50, what's 58% of that? Because that's what our Census Bureau data says is the working age of women. And that's this number. It's 58%, which is 193 million. And since men can't have abortions, I'm going to let that set in for a minute. That's how many people could be theoretically having abortions in America. So we go on and we say, hey, let's just say that that's rabbits that are working. Suppose that the rabbit population and the death rate of rabbits is 14.4 deaths per 1,000 rabbits. What would the total deaths be in per year? If the rabbit population is 193 million, blah, 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 that's the women working age. Says we can calculate the total deaths this way. Total deaths equal 2,783,165 deaths per year. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 1.12 million people per year over roughly 100 years, about 80 actually. That's a problem. That's a real problem here that we have. So now we've got to run these numbers. Now again, this is all estimations. Okay, that's all it is. You're talking very different things. On top of that, I think you can actually make the argument that the communism actually killed more people than the stats actually show. Solzhenitsyn gets into this. The point is that we are at least comparable, and we are in some sense even worse because at the end of the day, we actually have freedom. Our borders, for the most part, are isolated from other nations that would want to war against us. And we're still killing more people on average in the womb than the communist countries did. Now, that doesn't mean that they're better places to live as an adult. But the point is if we found out in World War II that basically everybody from conception all the way up to a year old were actually the ones being thrown into the ovens of the Nazi internment camps or Nazi concentration camps or in the gulags, right? That there was this kind of sterilization approach just to women and children. We would be appalled because of the nature of women and children. Even if you read some of Solzhenitsyn's stuff, there's still dignity that's achieved in the experience in the gulag. He even has a chapter dedicated to his prison cell where he learned to appreciate life. And this actually gets to the point of where even in darkness, it's still worth living because you don't know how God is going to use that to make your life actually resonate. And Solzhenitsyn is another example. And the millions of people who died in communist countries, when we get to heaven, we find out the stories of who was actually killed in those situations. We're going to hear those things. But the thing is that an unborn child doesn't even have that. And every denomination has to decide how they're going to deal with the theology of that child's salvation, and everybody has a different perspective on it. So, most of which actually believe that it's actually going into, that the child actually makes it to heaven. So, now many people will stop and say that the quality of life is better in our country versus those countries. This is true. I would still rather live in America rather than Russia or communist China or Nazi or Soviet occupied Poland. There's no doubt about that. This is not to say that America is not where I want to live or where you shouldn't want to live or where you shouldn't even want to defend and get involved politically. It's just to say that maybe we're not as good as everybody says we are, and that maybe we're actually facing judgment rather than the end times. Because if you were in Gulag and you were trying to say, some end times theology, I don't think it's going to go over very well because you're Russia. You're not the central figure of the world stage. So this also, I want to bring this up as a final thing on this subject, is that and I've brought this up a couple times before, is that we have this Hollywood view of like communist countries and Nazi Germany and stuff, where it's like, it's post-apocalyptic. It's like this horrible place. It's definitely like 1940s, 1950s, but it's post-apocalyptic. Are I seeing that quote right now?
No.
Okay.
It's only on you right now.
Okay. So anyway, at the end of the day, we've got this very kind of Hollywood version of these countries. But that's not how they actually were. Because you have to understand that even with those crazy numbers, even with the 20 million or the 65 million or whatever, you're talking about percentages of these countries. You're looking at like 10%. Okay, so you're not looking at like, it's very possible for you to live in Russia during the gulags, and statistically speaking, you're not going to end up in the labor camps. The reason why it's an atrocity is because of what was done to their humanity. It was stripped of them. So if you read In the First Circle, which is another book that I highly recommend for our time, Solzhenitsyn's In the First Circle, we find this principle actually illuminated by one of the characters. And just so you know, this isn't merely fiction. This is a fictionalized account of historical events that happened to real people. And so it's not quite historical fiction, but it is an incredible read. It is definitely something that'll cause you to think about what the gift of life actually is. And so we find ourselves in the shoes of Valentin, who is on this project in Soviet Russia. And what happened is that if you were a smart guy, you still found yourselves in the gulag. You just weren't in a labor camp. You weren't freezing your butt off trying to build the White Basin Canal. Instead, what happened is that you were in the first circle of hell, as Solzhenitsyn calls it, based on Dante's Inferno. And while you were there, you were expected to use your talent of engineering and electrician and all this kind of stuff to build, ready for it, the ability to voice print your citizens. Basically identify people's unique voice profile over the phone lines in Russia and automate the process so that way they could always find who was actually the betrayer just over the phone lines. And so this is actually the case. And you can test this out with your iPhone, by the way, which is pretty scary, is that if you have the voice prompt command on, it will recognize your voice. But if you give it to your wife or somebody who's got a very different voice profile than you, like a child, it won't pick it up because it knows your voice. Just saying, Stalin wanted it first. Anyway, so we find ourselves looking at Valentin, and what's happened to Valentin is he's an engineer. What is it?
Are you ready for me to transition?
No, not yet. Okay. So what we find with Valentin is that he is actually being summoned from the gulag to find out how this project is going, and he's been in the prison now, I think, for like 7 or 8 years. And what we find is his delusion about the state of his country falling from his eyes, because he believes surely somebody like him being in the gulag means that everything in Russia has just come to a complete halt. And he finds quite the opposite. So now we have this quote from in the 90. Prisoners in their millions imagined that in their absence, life outside the gulag had come to a halt, that there were no men left, and that women were pining away with no one to share, no one needing their love. But Valentin saw the well-fed, animated metropolitan crowd surging past, caught glimpses of hats, veils, silver fox furs, and his tingling senses were assailed through the frosty air, through the solid bodywork of the car, by wave after wave after wave of perfume from the women walking by. And I want to bring this up because I think what happens a lot of times is that you don't realize how effective the propaganda is. We can drop off that slide if you want. Okay. And we don't understand how dangerous the propaganda is at changing our perception of the sins of our own country. And this is one of the things that Solzhenitsyn in his writings did so brilliantly, was he highlighted that there could be atrocities happening in your country and you would not even know. In Gulag Volume 2, he brings up the fact that many people had no idea that the gulags even existed for as long as 20 years because the nation was so big, there was no internet, all this kind of stuff. Now we find ourselves in the internet era, and China is destroying the Uyghur population through mass extermination and concentration camps. And you've got Mulan being filmed down the road. So, obviously knowing about this stuff didn't do us any favors either, because we're just not that great of people. The root of evil is the love of money. And so at the end of the day, when we look at these things and we look at our own country and we say, well, which one's better, America or Russia? Well, obviously you want to live in America. But don't sit here and say that that America has not competed in the sins of atrocity similar to the communists. I mean, if there's one thing that is incredibly demonic, it's that the devil has been able to convince women through the medical enterprise and the pharmaceutical industries that to actually murder your child is to actually be more womanly, to actually, put it off and it just, it's not a life, it's not anything, and the devil has come in and proven to people in their own perceptions that to actually violate their nature as women is to actually fulfill it. That's just bad stuff. Hold on, let me see where we're at here in my notes. What were you gonna say, Lindsay?
Well, two things. First off, Daralovia has said that abortion was the birth control of choice in the USSR. And I also was thinking about Matt Walsh's recent tweet this week in response to Chelsea Handler. She put out that video about how great it is to not have kids, and Matt Walsh, and how great it is to not be a mom. And Matt Walsh pointed out, well, but she is a mom. She just chose to kill her 3 children.
Right. And again, I think Daralovia brings up a good point. At the end of the day, these numbers don't prove that Russia is necessarily a better place to live or that they weren't doing the same thing. In fact, I think you can argue that the death rates are actually higher because of all of the different systemic things that actually were caused by the environment. It's just that you've got all these people who want to water down the statistics, and Solzhenitsyn definitely was against that. You also, if in some of my research, you also saw that abortion is not anything new. Apparently, actually, in Rome, I read on Wikipedia of all places, so you know it's true, is that Saint Jerome actually talked about and condemned the process of drinking potions that would make you infertile. And so apparently there was a practice of that as well, and that's why the contraception debate goes back so far. I had no idea, actually. But the point is that at the end of the day, this is just the numbers in America. And the Guttmacher Institute shows that we were at like 45 million by the year 2009. That number is now up around 67 million in a shorter time span. And so the Russians were doing abortion just as much too. This isn't to say that the Russians weren't doing abortion. They were just throwing people in the gulag. So I appreciate Daralovia bringing that up. It's merely to point out that America is at least competing in that regard, even though we don't have gulags. And we're actually killing people at a higher rate. Also, we've expanded this internationally, because if you go to the Guttmacher Institute, they have all this stuff about how they need to make sure abortion gets into the hands of people all over the world. So America hasn't just become a gulag abortion center for itself. It's actually promulgated that vision out to the world. And so its death count as a result of America might even be higher. So that brings me to the question that we have to ask ourselves about this whole issue. Regardless of what you think about America, its success is not an indication of its morality. It is an incredibly immoral country who will be judged harder because of its prosperity and its freedom. When you read about Gulag, you can't help but sit there and think about your own soul and say, I don't think I would do very good there. I think I would be a stool pigeon. I think I would be a bad person. In America, you don't have to wrestle with those convictions. Even those who struggled with the COVID-19 stuff, they lost so much, but it's not necessarily to the same extent as what was in communist Russia. We still haven't reached that level. But we have used our freedom for greed and death, and God will not deal kindly with us unless we repent. Many say that the end times are near, but I think they confuse the end times for the judgment on America, a country that polls unquestionably Christian and lovers of freedom, but who also willfully slaughter children, prevents their birth, and claims that there are no distinctions between men and women. A country that cannot agree on the facts of children being protected, that genders are distinct, that genders have distinct and different roles in society, and that family and religion are an essential part of the human experience, will not be able to endure the judgment of heaven or hell. The only way forward is that we consider our faith, the doctrines that inform it, and then pray to God for the strength to endure and for the wisdom to use his mercy to never make these mistakes again. All right, now we're on to the last segment of the what the hell is going on. So we're going to have to definitely cut this down because I'm obviously losing my voice. So, man.
You're trying to decide which things you want to talk about.
Yeah.
So we got the Proud family here. We have this gentleman with a jar in his hand. And we've got this atrocious woman.
Yes.
Where you want to go?
So all this stuff. Let's start with the lady who posted this the tweet.
All right.
So
You'll hear the swoosh when I.
okay,
bring
just
it up.
before you do it.
Yeah.
So everybody, if you got kids in the room, I know that there aren't really any on the live stream, but if you do have kids in the room, this is not the family-friendly segment of the show. So just bear that in mind. Hopefully we don't get a strike for this stuff. But anyway, the bottom line is that we can show this now. This is all tied together. The trans stuff, the abortion stuff, all these things are tied together. You can just bring the slide up. And this tweet was something I found today. I'd like you to notice a couple things. First of all, the pronouns in the bio. That's always a good sign. Oh, and then abortion. And what she has there is a device. Obviously, I don't know how it's used, but obviously it's an abortive device to suck the child out of the womb. This is some bad stuff. We can pull that slide away. I think people have seen enough of it. So the reason why I want to bring this up is because a lot of times Christians are kind of compartmentalizing things. They're saying, well, the trans issue is that one really gets me, but contraceptives are okay. Have you pulled the slide down?
Yeah, it's pulled down.
So at the end of the day, these are all connected. This doctor has pronouns in her bio. You go to the Guttmacher website, they've got trans flags all over the place on their site, plus pride flags, all this kind of stuff. They are all part of the same doctrines of the world. And it's going to be doctrine versus doctrine. You're going to have to pick a side. And like my friend Jim has said, this country is doomed. And so the question becomes, well, what are we supposed to do in this time? And I want to bring up the fact that we've got also this kind of Disney Plus thing that's going on. So you've got the Proud Family. Do you have the clip for that? Mm-hmm. So let's play just a couple clips of the Proud Family. We're not going to play too much of it because I don't want to get flagged for copyright. But play this clip for them real quick. This is out on Disney Plus, and it is a total revisionist view of American history to promote racism amongst white and black Americans.
This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country. Tilled this land from sea to sea to sea. First there was rice, tobacco, sugar cane. Then Whitney did his thing and cotton became king. And we were its soldiers, 4 million strong, fighting for America's freedoms, even though we remained America's slaves. Built this country. The descendants of slaves continue to build it. Slaves built this country. And we
All right, that's good. All right.
Oh boy.
So did you put that up there? Okay. So at the end of the day, again, there's a lot going on. So that's coming out. You also have the fact that feminism and LGBT themes have been in Disney Plus for a while. And I just want to make the case, especially as we come up on Lent, that maybe, just maybe the best thing for you to give up on Lent this year is your Netflix subscription, or maybe your Amazon Prime subscription, or maybe your Disney Plus subscription. The thing is that there was a tweet that came out after that video from a black family who tweeted out.
Pull it up.
Yeah, pull it up.
All right. Oh, I've been doing a great job.
You have been doing a great job.
So great, you didn't even notice.
I know, that's true. Other than the jar of pickles that we just saw. So, but don't worry. Don't worry. We'll talk about it later. I'm just kidding. So I don't know who this is, but they tweeted this out. Dear Disney, we are a black family and our daughter's request. We are canceling Disney Plus over the Proud Family. She feels it promotes racism against whites. After looking at it, I have to agree with her, and I am so proud of her. Now, there's a problem with this. What the hell is the kid telling you about Disney Plus content? I agree. This is great. I understand, maybe some people can't, proof everything. But Disney's been a problem for a while, guys. A long time. I mean, you can just read the lyrics. I don't have them up on the screen for you, but I have them up here of Let It Go. And it is absolutely ridiculous. They are horrible lyrics. I'm just going to let it go, man. You guys, this is just a horrible, horrible song. And I'm just going to read a couple of them. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight. Aristotle said that music was a problem because it subverted your reason. Frozen's Let It Go is like one of the best, because if you talk to Christians, they're like, oh yeah, let it go. Even I use it like as a joke, like just let it go, man. I mean, it's incredible, the power of this song. She says, the snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen, a kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. The wind howling like this swirling storm inside, couldn't keep it in. Heaven knows I've tried. Don't let them in. Don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal. Don't feel. Don't let them know. Well, now they know. Let it go. Let it go. Can't hold back anymore. Let it go. Let it go. Turn away and slam the door. Now, let me just tell you right now. I don't know a parent out there that's going to be like, you know what, honey? Go slam your bedroom door. Just get it out. What were you going to say?
Daralovia has encouraged you to let it go, Daniel. Let it go.
You know what? Why don't you go find a castle in the mountains, Daralovia, and grow your hair out, put on a nice ice gown, and sing some songs to yourself. How about that? Because you know what? I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway, which is so... It's like they took a trope of a woman who was in an argument with her husband and then put it to song. It's like, hey, you all right, honey? No! The cold never bothered me anyway. Didn't even care.
I don't even care that I forgot my coat and you're offering me your coat.
Yeah.
I don't even care the cold doesn't bother me.
Quiet, woman. No, I'm just kidding. It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small, and the fears that once controlled me can't get to me at all. It's time to see. I'm going to read it as Batman. It's time to see what I can do. Test the limits and break through. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free. Now, when you say it like that, do you really want your daughter singing it? It's amazing what happens with the tone. Anyway, it's just horrible. I mean, it's not good. The perfect girl is gone. What's wrong with wanting to be a perfect girl? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that you might feel defeated on some days. But the point is that Christians just let this stuff go, and they say, well, I really want Aristocats, or I really want, Mulan, which is ironic. There's just so much about this platform that people just are willing to allow. And again, I'm saying you can't necessarily get away from it. So that's why I have a solution for you. Go buy the Disney movies that you think are great and need to be in front of your kids. That's what we do. You don't have to necessarily become a hermit. That's kind of the whole point of learning how to live in society. Even Elsa doesn't get it. You can't disconnect from society and become a hermit. You're not going to become human. You're meant to be a social animal. You need people. This is why solitary confinement is actually torture, which is ironic that the main character of this Frozen series actually decides to self-torture herself with self-isolation. So anyway, the last thing on the WTH segment is this testicles in a jar image. So I'm just going to go right for it. Yeah, just bring it up. We've got it censored, so you're not going to actually see it. Why this is important is because I think that people don't understand what's actually going on in the realm of women's sports. If you've got kids right now, I'm really thankful to Jake Crane and company for actually covering this story. They put a thread out where they actually did they discovered from some other NCAA athletes that competed with the Leah Thomas person. I can't remember his masculine name, but he's a dude. William Thomas. There you go. This is a real problem, and we're just gonna let you guess what's in that jar, and we're gonna pull it down. So that was the image that Lindsay wanted to have as the foreshadow for what's coming up. 15 minutes into the show, and I was like, "Hey, you gotta pull that down. Nobody wants to see that for longer than ever."
I did not mean to do that. I forgot that's what you were looking at. And,
right. So now that's not William Thomas. That's not the person that's doing all the swimming and stuff. There's apparently another transgender woman who is also in the transition process. They decided to, cut off the and, put it into a jar. And this is on his significant other's Instagram post, apparently. So the point is that at the end of the day, if we do not start standing up in some way to these things, okay, I'm not saying that you've got to shut down your internet, disconnect from the world, go off the grid, because that's not going to help either. Time and time again, isolationism has actually proven to just eventually end up at your doorstep. You have to have some kind of combination where you wisely make sure that you are actually present in the public space, that you are actually recognized. And if they will not recognize you, this is something that you really should take from the black community. What they have done in terms of the civil rights movement is when they were dehumanized, they asserted their humanity. It is incredibly vital today that Christians do the same thing and religious people do the same thing, that they assert their humanity and their right to be religious in a political society, that religion is as foundational to the health and well-being of their governments as family is. And if the governments are going to basically create their own religion, create their own kind of cult, because they want some sort of world order or whatever. And again, you can say that that's not true, but at the end of the day, this book right here, there is a quote in here from another academic who says, if the world is going to be a one world government, they will have to have a single religion. It is not a coincidence that these things are being promulgated as, this is Truth in Religion, by the way, by J. Mortimer Adler. And at the end of the day, that is going to be a necessary piece of what these globalists are trying to do. That's why they do it. They don't actually care about the trans community or the minority communities. They see them as a political leverage. And those who in those communities need to understand that. It might be great right now because you're living off the hog while they're giving you this advantage. But once it comes down to where you've served your purpose, they will disown you in the same way that that political governments have done throughout the history of time. So at the end of the day, take a stand, be strong, follow your conscience, learn your doctrines, keep thinking.